Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial by Code by the Grace. Now, in this tutorial, we'll be looking at files, okay? So we'll be looking at how to actually create a file, read from a file, and also update a file, okay? So to start this tutorial off, I'm going to create, let's say, for example, files.py, for example, and we are going to be creating files. Now, in Python, if you wanted to open up a file, this is how you would open a file. You would put usually open, and then you put the name of the file. So in this case, we may have data.txt, for example. Okay, and then you will have a comma, and then you have to choose what you want to do with this file. So in Python, there are three different modes that you can use when you're dealing with files. The first one is R, as you can see on the screen. R basically means that you're going to open the file for reading. If you were to use W, it means that you're going to open the file for writing. And then if you use A, it means that you want to add new information to existing data in the file. So in this particular example, if we use R, it means that the file already exists and we're trying to open it. But if you wanted to create a new file, you will put W, which creates or overrides whatever information that you have in that particular file. So because this is the first time I'm actually going to create this file, I'm going to use W. So W, okay, and then I'm going to close the file. Okay, if you can close the file. But what we need to do is every time we open up a file, we always assign it to a variable. So in this particular example, we're going to have f equals open and then f dot close. So in this case, f now represents our file, and then we can do whatever we want to do with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code now. Okay. And then what you should see is if we look inside of our folder, you can see data.txt. So that file has created a file called data.txt. Now we can look inside data.txt and you realize there is nothing inside data.txt. Okay, so that is how you create a new file. Or if we were to run this program again, and let's say, for example, let's say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in there, and I run my code again. Okay, when we go to data.txt, all the existing content in there would disappear because we've basically overwritten that file that we have with an empty something. So that is how you create a file in Python. Okay, so those are the three different modes that we have. And again, to go through the file again, you see here, Python just tells the file what to do. This open, Python is just telling it which file you want to open and what mode you want to use it. If you use R, it means read only. If you use W, it means you're creating or overwriting file. And then you can do whatever you want to do with it. Now, the next step is we want to write something to our file. So what are we going to do? Well, what we can do is, in order for us to write something to the file, there are two different ways of us actually creating and opening a file. Sometimes you may see people do it this way. In other examples you may see people do W as, instead of creating it this way, sometimes you may see things like with open, and then you may see data.txt as file. Now, the reason why you do it this way, right, is because sometimes developers forget to close your file. But with open, whenever you use this with statement, what happens is Python automatically closes the file after you've written content to it. So the difference between using this and using this is because this one you have to manually close it yourself, but with open, Python closes it the file for you. So that is how you're able to um, create a file or do whatever you want to do with that file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be using the with open. So I'm going to get rid of this here and then with open. And then what we can do is we can say content equals file, okay, dot read, and then print content. Now what this code will do, 1, 2, 3 will do is it will read whatever content we have inside that data.txt, and then it will print it out onto the screen. So let's say, for example, we go to our data.txt, and then let's say we write hello world, for example, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and see if we can run this code here. So what you see here is actually, right? Remember that when we used with open, we've now used this R, which stands for read only. So because we have content called hello world, what we're doing here is it goes to the file, it reads whatever's in there, hence why we have file.read. So it reads whatever content we have in there, and then it prints it out onto the console. And that's why you're able to see hello world. Now remember that with the with statement, you don't have to automatically close the file yourself. Now, what if we wanted to write to our file? So here I've just shown you how you can actually read from a file. But what if we wanted to write to our file? Well, if you wanted to write to our file, what we can do is we can do file.write, and then we can put some content into our file. So in this case, let me say hello Kofi. And remember that you have to change the mode from R to W. Okay. So what we'll end up with is we'll end up with something like this, which basically saying on line 1, open up data.txt. We are going to write something to that file. And whatever we're going to write is called hello Kofi. So if you look inside data.txt, let me put it to the right hand side of the window. Right. The minute I run my code, can you see that it's written over what we had before? So in this case, we end up with hello Kofi. So that's how you write to a file. Okay, that's how you write to a file. Now you can also use the print statement to actually write to a file. Now, how would you do this? Well, let's say, for example, we had a code. We had two variables, code equals, and let's say Python, for example, is fun. And then we may have the name could be Emmanuel, no problem. And then we will write with open, okay? We can do data.txt as file. And what we can do is we can do print, and then we'll do this F and then name, okay? Name, and then says exactly what it's telling us to do, code, and then we can assign it with the file. Now, what this F here allows us to do is allows us to actually use variables within text. It makes it quite easier for us to use variables within text. So what we're doing here is we're saying print out the name and then print out the code. And then in our print statement, so one of the beauty things about the print statement is it actually has a lot of modes that you can actually work with. So what you are used to seeing us use the print for is just to print hello world. That's what you're seeing us use all the time. But if we were to add a comma, we will use a different function inside that print statement. And that function that we're going to use is file. So what happens is the minute we run our code, it's going to print out code and name to our file. Okay, so that's also another way of how you can actually write to a file. You can use the print function which can directly run write to a file, which is sometimes simpler than building strings and writing each line. So that's what the print statement allows us to do. Okay. Now let's move on to we've now looked at using open. Now we're using with, and then we've also looked at two different modes, which is read and write. So now let's move on to appending information to a file. Okay, so right now we in our file now, we now have, right? We now have Emmanuel says Python is fun. That's amazing. That's great. But what if we wanted to write something else? So what I'll do is f dot write, right? And I'll instead of me writing this, I'll just say I am excited. Okay, I am excited. Uh, dot write. I am excited. Okay, and we don't need this because we're not putting any variables in there. Now, what you can see here is I'm writing I'm excited. If I don't change W to an A, I'm gonna have a bit of issue because what's going to happen is it's going to override everything I'm saying. So for me to add to that particular file, I'm going to change W to an A. And then when I click on play, it adds I am excited to our file. So that is how you're able to write to a file, read from a file, and also append to a file. Okay. Now, there are also different things that you can use when you use the file version. So if you remember in the previous example I showed you, we had something like this: f equals open data.r, and then we were doing f.read. Now we can also use, instead of read, we can use read lines. Okay. Now read retrieves the entire file as a single string. Okay. Read line reads every single line at a time. And then if we were to use read line, so if we use read line, it will read every single line at a time. If we use read lines, what it will do is it will load all the files that we have into a string. So in this example, let's say I was to comment this out and let's just use this code here, data.txt, and we're reading it. And content equals f.readlines. Actually, let's do read. And let's print content, for example. And then, of course, we have to close it because we're not using. Let's close it. So we'll end up with something like this. You can see here, Emmanuel, Python is fun. If we were to do read line and print it, you would see that it's kind of read each line, but sometimes it's forgotten about the other one. But if we do read lines, you end up with something like this. It actually breaks down these lines into strings. Okay. Now, for those of you that have done other programming languages, this is like an array, but when it comes to Python, this is like a list. So it's actually put, Emmanuel says Python is fun, and you can see here that it's put it in here as one, as item 0, and then I'm excited as item 2. So what we can do is, if we wanted to only get access to the first content, we can just put 0 here, and then we can only get Emmanuel says Python is fun, because we're only printing out the first thing inside our thing. And that is how you read Python files. Okay. Now, I hope that this is very helpful so that you know exactly how to write to a Python file. Okay. I'll see you in the next video.